Okay, hello everyone. All right, so there are so many errors you're going to encounter, right? Well, we don't plan for them, right? But it's possible you're going to encounter them. There are some common ones you're going to encounter that I want you to see so that you can avoid them, right? They're so common that we do them all the time, right? Unintentionally. So I just want you to see all of them or a couple of them, so you can at least see what they are when you encounter them and know how to fix it. All right. So the first thing is when you forget, let's say, an opening or a closing curly brace or parentheses or even a double quotation. So let me show you what I mean. So anytime you have a closure, for example, we know this is our class, right? And we know this is the opening curly brace of it, and we know this is the closing curly brace of it, right? If we forget this closing curly brace or we forget this opening curly brace, it's going to give us an error. If I delete the opening curly brace and I run it, we have an error. If I put it back, it works, right? Because this is the opening curly brace, this is the closing curly brace. The same thing for the main method over here. The main method, this is the main method header. We'll talk more about methods in the future. This is the opening curly brace of the main method. This is the closing curly brace of the main method, right? I can't forget any one of them. Anytime you open a curly brace, you have to remember to close the curly brace. All right. Also, be careful not to switch the position. Sometimes it's very easy to switch the position. Instead of having it closing, right, closing, you can easily open it this way. And when you run it, you have an error. So make sure that this is the opening, it's opening, right? And this has to close it the other way. Flip the other way around. Same with this also. All right, same with parentheses too. Anytime you open a parentheses over here, it's supposed to end, okay, with its closing parentheses. It's supposed to have its pair, like it's matching other pair. As you can see, Dr. Java is trying to help you by highlighting. It highlights all the way to its closing curly brace. When you put it at the end, sorry, that was my phone. When you put it at the end of the opening curly brace, it highlights all the way down to its closing curly brace. When you put it at the end of the opening curly brace over here for the main method, it highlights all the way down to the closing curly brace. So Dr. Java helps you. If you put it at the end, okay, of the opening parentheses, it highlights all the way to the closing parentheses for you. Same thing when you have double quotations. So if we have a system.out.println statement, for example, anytime you have, let's say, hello, anytime you have an opening double quotation, you have to go ahead and have its closing double quotation mark. Okay, you can remove this. If we try to compile this, we have an error. So make sure you have its closing double quotation mark. All right. Otherwise, it's going to think you're not done with your string. You open the double quotation, you keep going. It's going to think all of this is part of the string, and you need to close it. Right. So I'm going to close it somewhere around here, and then because I have my closing double quotation, so when I compile this, it's working. All right. So the next thing is when you misspell keywords, certain keywords like public. If you misspell it, it's very easy for you to misspell it. So I'm going to remove the B, for example, and or let's say Pulic or Pollock. If you compile this, it's going to give you an error, right? Because it's not a spelled correct keyword. Class, if you have something like I don't know, class or something, right? It's going to complain, obviously. All right, so make sure you don't misspell your keywords too, or main, for example, or void. Just make sure you don't misspell them. All right, so the next thing is when you use capital letters for your keywords. Remember we talked about keywords, and remember we said you can't use capital letters in keywords. All keywords are in lowercase. So public, class, public, static, all of them are in lowercase. You can see that Dr. Java is doing a good job by highlighting these as blue. The kind of light blue characters or words are all keywords, right? And they're all in lowercase. They all have to be in lowercase. Now, this is a class name, so that's different, right? Keywords are things like these. We talked about those. Dr. Java highlights them in light blue. So no capital uppercase letters in that. All right, so the next thing is when you try to use a keyword as a variable name, right? We know public is a keyword, so when we try to declare a variable, let's say string, and call it public, and give it a value of, let's say, Kakra, compile it, I'm trying to use a keyword over here as a variable name, and it doesn't allow that, right? I can't use a keyword as a variable name. All right, so delete that. I know we're going to have a lot of errors here. Let me just take this down. It's going to pop up because there are going to be lots of errors popping up too, but ignore that. We're just trying to see the different errors and how to fix them, or know what they are, so you can't, or you shouldn't, so you don't do them, right? You try not to do them. All right, if you create a variable and you don't reference it well, I think I did this in the past videos, and we fixed it, right? But it goes to show that you're going to make these errors unintentionally, right? So it's better to know, so you can at least have an idea of how to fix it or what's wrong. So when I declare a string variable of, let's say, full name, and I gave it a value of I'll just type in something, right? Doesn't matter. And then I say system.out.println. Oops. Full name, this way. Sometimes you may look like you are referencing or you are referring to this variable, right? But then the case, doesn't match. This one has a capital N and this one has a lowercase n. We know Java is case sensitive, so it's seeing these two as two different things. It says, okay, full name with a capital N is declared, but it's going to say, what is this? This hasn't even been declared, because these two are different variables, because one has a lowercase n and one has an uppercase n. So when I compile this, it's going to complain and says cannot find this one, right? Because it hasn't been declared. So when you are referring to the variables, make sure that you are referring to the ones that you've already declared. So I'm going to change this back to the capital N, and it should be able to see it. All right. Okay. So what else? All right, so it goes with uppercase and then spelling, right? So when you're spelling your variables and when you're, it goes the same way. Spelling your variables or using uppercase, or basically check the case when you're creating your variables. Also, when you insert a space in your variables, you can't do that, right? So you can't over here let's just delete this. Try to declare full name with a space in there, right? It's going to complain. It has to be together. Compile this, and it's saying it doesn't like the space, right? All the letters have to be together. Once you do this, you're breaking the variable name, and it doesn't like that. So I'm going to bring it back. So you can't do that too, so just watch out for that. Also, you can't forget, all right, the semicolon at the end of your statement. When I remove this, remember we have to terminate our Java statements. Not all of them, right? Because we talked about the fact that you don't terminate like class headers and method headers, right? Remember we talked about it. But for our regular statement, you have to remember to have your semicolon and not remove them. All right, so I'm going to compile this. It's going to complain, say that this is expected. Semicolon is expected over here. So I'm going to put it there and then compile, and now it works. So don't forget your semicolons. All right, another thing is, when you try to, let's say, assign a double value to, let's say, a float variable. So I'm going to declare a float variable here, and I'm going to call it my float. And I'm going to try to assign it a regular value that I think is a float. The thing is, remember we learned about this, that anytime Java sees any floating point value, whether it's a float, whether it's a double, any floating point value, any number with a decimal in there, Java, instantly automatically assumes that number to be a double. Over here, we declare this variable as a float, right? But remember we talked about the fact that anytime you declare, or basically anytime you write a floating point literal, or basically a floating point value, any number with a decimal, Java assumes that number to be a double, right? In this case, we think this number is a float, right? We think it should be able to store 2.4 into this variable. But because Java assumes this number to be a double, it looks like you are trying to assign a double value to a float variable, right? And we know that a float can't hold. A float is too small for a double value. Doubles are bigger than floats, right? And so floats can't store doubles, because Java assumes every floating point literal or every floating point value as a double. And so if you really wanted this number as a float, we have to add the letter F at the end of the number, right? To tell Java that, oh, don't assume this number to be a double, assume it to be a float. Compile it, and it works. When we use uppercase F, that also works. Uppercase F, lowercase f, both of them work. So compile that, that also works. All right, so let me think of something else, another error. All right, so another thing is when we learn how to actually we'll learn how to properly format currency values. Like we'll learn how to format. Let's declare this as let's see, a double. Sorry, a double, and let's call this my money. Let's initialize it to, let's say, 1 million. Right. All right. We'll learn how to properly display these values as currency values with a dollar sign and commas. Okay, we'll learn how to do that. But one thing you shouldn't do, let's try to display the content of my money. Compile it and run. One thing you shouldn't do is, see over here, it doesn't look like a real monetary value. It doesn't have the dollar sign, that doesn't have commas. So one thing you shouldn't do is go in here and put in the commas here by yourself. Don't do this, because this is not right. These literals, you can't have comma signs in there. You can't have a dollar sign in there like that. If you try to compile this, it's going to give you an error. There's a way to actually properly format numbers as currency values, and we'll learn more about that. So just create your variables or your literals or your values this plain without any special characters, and accept the period, for example, right, if it's a double or something. But don't use commas or currency symbols like a dollar sign or a pound sign or whatever it is to try to format it directly. There are ways to format it, and we'll learn more about it. Okay.